Hi, everyone. Hi, thank you so much for coming to this event tonight. I'm super excited. We're going to be discussing the results of a survey that's been over a year in the making. We came to this survey, we meaning the Sexual Trauma and Abuse Care Center, in partnership with Live-Well Douglas County, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, the Willow Domestic Violence Survey, the City of Lawrence, Douglas County, the Lawrence Public Library, many other wonderful partners, Lawrence Tenants. We created this survey about a year ago, over a year ago, because we had been doing quite a bit of work on researching protective ordinances for renters in Douglas County. The result of that research was protections for source of income being passed under our city's discrimination code. In the process of doing research to advocate for source of income, we realized there was a significant lack of data about the experiences of tenants in Douglas County. When you're trying to do research, when you're trying to advocate for policy and there's no proof that that policy needs to exist, it becomes very hard for that policy to exist. So this survey was an exhaustive, kind of comprehensive measure of all of the things that renters may experience, all the challenges and barriers they may experience to finding and keeping safe and stable housing. And we wanted to gather some data on what that actually looked like in terms of what folks were experiencing in their day-to-day lives. We're hoping that the data in this survey can continue to advance change and can continue to make housing more equitable, more accessible, safer, higher quality for the over 50% of Lawrence that lives in rental housing. And today we've got a wonderful presentation put together by our partners, kind of covering the analysis of that data, as well as a panel with some community members and community experts about the implications of that data. So thank you all very much for being here. I'm excited to dive in. We've got a lot of fun graphs, a lot of fun numbers, if you're inclined towards those things. And I'll pass it to Christina Holt, who will be presenting.
Thank you so much, Gabby, and thank you so much to all of you for showing up tonight for Douglas County Renters. My name is Christina Holt. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with the Center for Community Health and Development. Really so thankful to be able to come together tonight to talk about some of the results from this community survey. And we are deeply grateful for our co-hosts this evening here at the Lawrence Public Library and the partners that you see here represented on this screen, and my colleagues at the Center for Community Health and Development who have helped with analyzing and putting this data together, and for our funder at the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and ultimately the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So welcome. This work has been the ongoing work of many committed community members, and I cannot take credit for that. I am simply the messenger tonight. So kudos to the many of you here in this room and in the community who are dedicated champions of this cause. The Sexual Violence Prevention Work Group that Gabby mentioned is a group of community members, nonprofit staff, community leaders, local elected leaders, local government, and others. And the table is open, and we really need more voices. And so if you are interested, we hope that you will join us in some of these ongoing advocacy efforts to improve housing for all in Douglas County. When we engaged in some early assessment, it became clear that one of the primary risk factors for sexual violence in our community was severe housing cost burden, much higher in Lawrence than in the rest of the state of Kansas. And despite our local efforts to grow affordable housing, some people who had housing vouchers remained houseless because landlords were refusing to rent to them. The coalition organized to research and different options, what had other communities done that had worked elsewhere, and to begin raise awareness about the issue and to engage in some community conversations. We were thrilled that ultimately the Lawrence City Commission voted to expand protections against discrimination on the basis of a person's source of income, immigration status, and protections for survivors of sexual and domestic violence, human trafficking, and stalking. So the next strategy has been to engage tenants further in surveys to learn more in their own words about the challenges and the barriers that they're facing to safe and affordable housing. And the goal of this effort is simply that our community can improve efforts to ensure that we are affordable, safe, and welcoming to all. As Gabby mentioned, we know that approximately half of the homes in Douglas County are renter occupied, and approximately half of those renters are cost burdened, meaning that they pay 1/3 or more of their income towards rent. And 35% are severely cost burdened, meaning that the rent that they pay is over 50% of their income. Additionally, our Housing Choice Voucher here has a long waiting list, approximately 320 people with about a 1.5 to 2 year wait. So this survey sought information on all kinds of information, the demographics of the person filling out the survey, housing basics, their experience finding housing, the quality of the housing conditions and maintenance, housing accessibility, their current living situation, rental payment methods, being at risk of displacement, the rental application process, lease non-renewals and evictions, safety, and perhaps most importantly, their ideas for what needs to be improved in our community. The group was really intentional about reaching out to those community members who experience housing insecurity and who experience barriers to safe and affordable housing, and worked with community partners to ensure outreach. Online as well as paper copies were distributed to through community partners. And many thanks to our community partners here who are here tonight who helped with that process, including the library, Lawrence Tenants, Independence Inc., Burt Nash, the Humane Society, East Lawrence Family Care, First Med, Justice Matters, the ECM, Community Children's Center, Ballard Center, Just Food, Willow Domestic Violence Center, Checkers, and the Dillons on 23rd Street, the Lawrence Laundromat, Get It, Give It, Family Promise, and Black Lawrence. We were thrilled that we received 1,051 survey responses that were reflective of the diversity of our community, with the caveat it wasn't quite as representative of Asians as we would have liked. But overall, it was quite representative of the demographics of our community. And I want to share a few highlights with you from the surveys as well as a series of focus groups that were conducted. One thing to note is that we did receive the 1,051 survey responses. However, each of the survey questions was optional and could be skipped if folks weren't comfortable. So the number of people who answered each question did vary. And many of the questions had an open response area where people could write in additional information if they wished to do so. Regarding housing availability and affordability, it took applicants an average of 3 months and 5 applications to find a place to live. Also, in the survey of those who responded, 67% reported rent increases recently, and of those, 22% reported an increase of $200 or more per month. Residents reported difficulties that were posed by increasing rent and shared making hard choices, such as whether to pay for food or whether to pay for rent. Our residents report many barriers to obtaining or renewing leases. The majority of those who had rental applications denied by a property manager or landlord, 57%, reported that the landlord did not give them a reason for the denial. Of those who did provide a reason, main barriers included credit history, finance history, source of income, rental history, employment history, and criminal history. Additionally, many residents reported being negatively affected by excess fees, and nearly 40% of respondents reported having their security deposits withheld. Residents also reported lack of rental properties within their budget and lack of rental properties that met their needs. A total of 86 of the respondents reported that they had received an eviction notice during their time as renters in Douglas County. And of those, the vast majority, 94%, had no legal representation during the eviction process. Evictions resulted in a loss of housing for 62% of those impacted, and 20 respondents who lost their housing became homeless after being evicted. Those of lower incomes are at higher risk of being served eviction notices. Nearly half of the participants who had been served eviction notices had an annual income less than $21,400. Some residents share that they live with constant anxiety about not being able to afford that month's rent. Of those surveyed, almost half of renters have felt unsafe in their rental home. Nearly 2/3 reported that there had been times when they had submitted a maintenance request and it was not resolved. And 337 respondents reported that they had chosen not to submit a maintenance request at all for fear of retaliation from the property manager, such as lease non-renewal. People in the lowest household income bracket were more than 4 times as likely to rate their quality of housing as very poor than those who were surveyed from the highest income range. They report that housing often lacks regular inspections or code enforcement, and hazardous conditions sometimes include mold, foundation or plumbing issues, non-working appliances, and pests. One resident shared, "I haven't been afraid of retaliation from a maintenance request until recently. Last week, I asked my landlord to fix a clogged toilet, which they did fix after a few days, but afterwards they posted a letter on my door threatening not to renew my lease." Another person shared, "We don't want to cause any waves, because when we do, then the landlord starts to get belligerent and he's saying he's not going to give us another lease. He could just up and say, 'You have to get out now.'" Someone else shared, "You are stuck and they know it because you can't afford to move." 90 respondents reported that their landlord had verbally harassed them, called them names, threatened, or intimidated them. The majority had an annual household income less than $35,600, 63%. And 12 respondents actually reported that their landlord or representative of their landlord had physically harassed or assaulted them. One renter shared, "The way he was talking to us, kind of threatening, my daughter was very scared. She's like, 'When is he going to kick us out? Do we have any rights?'" 1 in 5 of those surveyed said their landlord or property manager had made them feel unsafe, and this was highest in zip code 66044. One resident shared, "I almost wanted to get a restraining order, but I'm thinking, how do you get a restraining order from your landlord?" 46% of survey respondents have felt unsafe in their rental home, and there are disparities of feelings of safety between neighborhoods. Additionally, some residents express concern contacting police for help. Almost 1/3 of respondents have a household member with disability. There's an intersection of these issues, as those who are most in need of accommodations are likely to have lower annual incomes. One person shared, "As a person with a disability, this is one of the most frustrating things I realized while looking for rental housing. There's an inverse relationship between affordable and accessible housing." 36% of households who require accommodations or identify with having a disability rate the accessibility of their housing as very poor or poor. Tenants with physical disabilities report housing often lacks accessibility or fails to meet ADA standards. One resident shared, "All of the units have steps, either to get to the front door or inside. I cannot always walk or use stairs, but this was one of very few properties I could afford." Residents also reported discrimination due to factors including race, ethnicity, sexual orientation and gender identification, disability, age, and parental status by landlords and community members. These are a few quotes shared by community members. "Housing is not a luxury, it's a need. We had to move because we couldn't afford to eat. I have been traumatized by my experiences renting in Lawrence. Renters need support from the city. We have heard the voices of our residents, so what are we to do?" Tenant protections passed in the forms of laws and policies are critically important tools protecting tenants against rising rental costs, discriminatory and arbitrary eviction processes, and other threats to housing stability. Tenant protections can help level the playing field between landlords and tenants, rectifying the long-standing power imbalance that impacts the lowest income and most marginalized renters. We heard loud and clear that we need more affordable housing in our community. One policy option would be a tenant opportunity to purchase ordinance, which is a law that gives tenants in multifamily buildings the right to purchase their building when the landlord intends to sell. A tenant opportunity to purchase has been in effect in Washington, D.C. since 1980 and has helped preserve over 3,500 units of affordable housing. Several policy recommendations from A Place for Everyone, our plan to end homelessness in Lawrence and Douglas County, also speak to increasing affordable housing, including providing recommendations for city code updates that allow for affordable housing development, and establishing an incentive program for affordable housing development. We know that approximately 19 out of 20 of those who are served eviction notices have no legal representation during the process. Policy options for providing better support for tenants include a tenant right to counsel ordinance that guarantees that tenants who face legal eviction have legal representation. Another policy option is a just cause eviction ordinance or a good cause ordinance. This limits the reasons that a tenant can be evicted. Just cause eviction ordinances are designed to prevent arbitrary, retaliatory, or discriminatory evictions. And we know that tight screening standards can create barriers for potential renters who have a history of eviction filings, criminal offenses, or credit challenges. These potential renters are frequently screened out of the vast majority of available rental housing. Policymakers can address these high barriers through more inclusive screening processes. Some states and cities have implemented laws that regulate tenant screening processes, such as fair chance laws that aim to reduce the degree to which a landlord can review an applicant's history. Passing an ordinance prohibiting junk fees is another policy option. These fees can show up in all stages of the rental process. One organization counted 27 different types of fees that can be assessed to renters, both during the application process, during tenancy, and also post-tenancy or during eviction. A junk fees prohibition ordinance encourages transparency and fairness in the rental market, including capping or eliminating unnecessary and often hidden rental fees. Lastly, it is critical to ensure enforcement of Lawrence's protection against source of income discrimination, which is also a recommendation of a place for everyone. Residents express the need for proactive rental inspections, public rental registries, and more legal protections for tenants. Rent stabilization and rent control, which are government-enforced policies that limit how much landlords can charge for rent, can protect tenants from excessive rent increases. Unfortunately, Kansas state law does currently prohibit rent control. While there is a tenant landlord rights and responsibilities ordinance meant to protect tenants from landlord exploitation and ensure tenant rights here locally, many tenants are not educated about their rights and do not know where to go when they face issues. Recommendations that we share with a Place for Everyone community plan to end homelessness regarding improving inclusivity and equity in access to housing include establishing ongoing roles in this work for people with lived experience, like we've been hearing from today and will hear from today. Focusing on equity in policy and budget decisions. Developing a plan for ongoing community engagement regarding affordable housing, and developing programs that increase racial equity in affordable housing access and land ownership. When asked about their hopes about what they would see in 2035, a focus group participant shared, "Lawrence is an all-inclusive community. There is no discrimination. You can find affordable housing that is safe. Your landlord treats you as a person." A beautiful vision for us all. We have some time for question and answers. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have regarding the survey, the results, the presentation, and then we're going to hear from some panelists. So if you have questions that you would like to ask of the panelists, you received note cards on your way in, and you're welcome to write your question down on your note card, and we'll be collecting those for the panelists as well. Additionally, I put my contact information up if you would like to be in touch. And the full version of the report that these slides are based on are available online on our website. But I'd love to open it up if anyone has any questions. Absolutely. Yes, you don't have to write your question down if you have a question that you'd like to ask. And if not, yes.
I more have like an experience that I'd like to share. I live in Topeka, but I would say that housing is probably pretty similar. Over the summer, I had just moved into my new apartment, and it was July. which was kind of right when it started to get hot there. And my AC went out, and it didn't get fixed for a month. And I, threw my weight around, kind of threatened my landlord with legal action, asked for a discount on my rent because they had given me a window unit, but it had run my AC, my energy prices way up. And he told me that the best he could do was replace my faucets, which were not the problem. And eventually, I don't think he was exactly the landlord, like precisely. He was just the property manager. He took $50 out of his own account and put that onto mine just because he felt so bad. And I'm like, $50 isn't really going to do anything for me, but I appreciate it nonetheless. So, but this hasn't been an experience that I've had at every apartment that I've lived in. There's been some issue that has interfered with a need that I had, and it wouldn't get fixed for weeks or months on end. And we pretty much have no housing rights in Kansas. I was not able to withhold rent. I really had no idea what resources I had or things that I could do to better my own situation. So I was really happy to hear about the tenant survey and resources that are kind of being put out there for Lawrence residents and everything.
Thank you so much. If there are, yes.
My name's Alex. This is my 32nd year in Lawrence. I'm from LA. And I grew up with 3 big sisters. I watched all of them go through single motherhood. And single motherhood's got to be the hardest job on the planet. But what I saw a lot of here was a lot of single moms who are homeless. And that's really hard to process. And what I've been asked by a lot of these homeless moms when I worked with them at the TRC as a guard was they need help with childcare so they can work. Affordable, or better yet, free quality childcare is really needed here. Really, really needed here. It's really important.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Can you tell me the degree to which young people who have been in foster care were represented in your survey? And if not, why not?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. We know that youth who have been in the foster care system are disproportionately affected by housing barriers and have ongoing needs. I don't believe we had a question in the survey that asked specifically about whether folks had experience formerly as foster children. This survey was for those who were 18 years and over. But based on the population that we surveyed, I personally know it did include some, but I couldn't tell you what the percentage was. But thank you for raising that population because it is a critical population to be considering as we're considering safe and affordable housing needs.
I was just wondering, has there been, or maybe should there be, a survey of landlords? And then to see not just what their thoughts are, but if there's some common areas, or have landlord representation on some of these committees or organizations? Is that something that's currently being done?
There has not been a landlord survey done, to my knowledge. That's a great idea. And absolutely, the idea for landlord engagement is very much needed. So we do have a presentation coming up also to the Affordable Housing Advisory Board coming up in a few weeks. Okay, we'll take this question and maybe one other if there's others, and then we'll invite our panelists to come up.
I was just curious, I know the city has a rental inspection program. where landlords pay a nominal fee towards this, and the city sends inspectors out literally to look at things like mold, ADA. So I haven't had time to look at this, but I'm curious, what's the implication that many of these situations, these houses, these apartments, are under the radar, they're not formally registered, or is the city falling down on the inspections? Or, because the inspectors would be a separate third party that would report something like mold, where a tenant wouldn't have to worry about exposing themselves to that kind of interaction.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. And unfortunately, our City of Lawrence Affordable Housing Administrator, who had planned to be here tonight, is sick. However, you're right. We do have an existing inspections process. My understanding, and anyone else can join in, is that they are understaffed and underfunded, and it makes it impossible for them to do the frequency of inspections that are needed in order to keep up on all of the rental properties.
I can speak to that as well. Not every single unit is inspected annually. That's all I have to say. So a tenant can submit a request for an inspection if they feel that there's a code compliance issue or that their apartment is not up to code. If, for instance, there is like an apartment building or a landlord who has a ton of units, like let's say they have like 25 units, not every single one of those units necessarily has to be inspected annually. So oftentimes those sorts of code inspection issues may fall under the radar if they're only being inspected every few years, every 5 years. The code enforcement does not like it's not like someone comes in every single time a lease turns over, if that makes sense. And yeah.
Thank you, Gabby. With that, I would love to invite our panelists to come up and our panelist facilitator.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. My name is Faith Lopez. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the prevention specialist at the STA Care Center. And I will be asking our amazing panelists up here some questions. But before we get into that, if we want to go down and maybe say your name, your pronouns, and then a little bit about who you are. Margot, do you want to start?
My name is Margot Self, and I am the Director of Community Services at the Willow Domestic Violence Center. Pronouns are she, her, and I have been involved with the STP housing worker for the last
turn on the mics.
year. Sorry.
Wow.
Thank you.
Or I guess it's over a year, a little over a year.
Thank you so much. Alex, do you want to?
Hello, that's me, Alex. This is my 32nd year, like I said, in Lawrence. I've been homeless, not for a real long time, but it seemed like an eternity, and it's a horrible place to be. And I've worked with the homeless extensively at the TRC. I was a security guard there for a year, and saw things that just changed me forever. And a lot needs to be done, and I definitely really want to be a part of that.
Thank you so much, Alex. Abby?
My name is Abby. I have had a lot of experience with homelessness, poor quality rental places, poor quality landlords, lease or rights violations, and things like that.
Hi, I'm Representative Christina Haswood, State Legislator for Kansas House District 10, and I've been in the legislature for the past 4 years, and my pronouns are she, hers.
Amazing. So as we go through some of the prepared questions we have for the panelists, again, we want to make sure that this is an open and inclusive conversation, so there will be a portion at the end in which we can open the questions to the audience.
But first, what surprised you about the report and data, or what didn't surprise you? And this is open to all panelists.
I'll say that one thing that surprised me was the length of time that most respondents said it took to find an available and affordable rental. Because in my work and helping clients through the Willow Domestic Violence Center, it typically took much longer than that for us to help them find affordable, safe housing. So that was pretty surprising. Unfortunately, a majority of the rest of the survey was not very surprising to me.
For me, going through homelessness and then having to find a place, and it's not easy to do, especially if you don't have credit or lengthy employment or whatever. But in this report, I was shocked at the discrimination and the actual harassment. People were afraid for their safety and for, to even call in for a repair. I mean, that's not okay. That's just really hard to process.
Honestly, I'm not sure anything surprises me anymore after my life experiences. I personally have slipped through the cracks since I was a toddler. My children have also had the ball dropped on them by people that were supposed to help us. So I really can't say I'm surprised. I am a little surprised that more people didn't put in input. I think we need more people, at least next time.
I felt like I wasn't surprised by the data. I myself grew up in Section 8 housing funding here in Lawrence, and grew up in apartments. Currently, I've been a renter for the past 4 years, where I came from my parents' house, try to stay there as long as possible, before venturing out into getting an apartment with my partner, where we split rent and all utilities evenly. My job as a state legislator proven to be extremely complicated to hold predictable income. We make about $20,000 to $30,000, about $25,000 as a salary, and then applying to jobs. I have a master's degree, so applying to jobs was really difficult. No one wants to hire somebody who can be full-time half of the year. And this resulted in unpredictable income throughout the year, where I had to turn to consultancy. And if you have done gig work, you never really know if that payment's going to come in on time. And I was, I wasn't surprised by the data in this. I felt seen, where, that anxiety of right now, of am I going to make this month's rent next month? My biweekly payments don't magically come in the 31st for me to pay on the 1st type of deal. So, and even facing my first eviction notice in August, coming off of a campaign, was such a reality in the face of this can literally happen to anybody. And if I could pick, if there was a surprising fact, it would be the lack of renter protections and policies that we have at our local and state levels, attempts and efforts at the state level as well. And as I was a part of the City of Lawrence's Human Relations Commission when we started the income discrimination ordinance, and I was shocked when we did talk to landlords. Now, granted, not every landlord has this capitalistic mindset, but when we did talk to landlords that expressed concerns of the income discrimination ordinance, it was a very, my blood pressure. I left that conversation with my face red. Just the tone and the stereotypes, the underlying racism, the micro discrimination, all of that came. And I think one of the folks that I worked with on that almost left in tears. We debriefed in the parking lot, and I was like, I just can't believe, this is kind of where this is at. And to see, it's one thing to read about it in a report. It's another thing to talk to people who actually believe this. It was really disheartening, so, yep.
I actually have something else.
Absolutely.
One of the things that was shocking to me and very sad is I think Lawrence has a population of 120,000 or so, I don't know. And people go on Facebook all day, every day, and talk about everything from Walmart to what they had for breakfast. But there was only 1,000-something surveys that were answered. Why? because it's definitely out there. I'm sure you guys know who Amy Brockman is, and she runs the police scanner page, Live Love Lawrence. Love her to death. She does amazing things for this community. But anytime there's a post about a transient or the word homeless is used, then bum, junkie, drug addict, parasite. And that just infuriates me. And I think, excuse me, this is a hard topic. I think the stigma needs to be shattered. I think that needs to happen. And I think there needs to be more public awareness. People need to know what homelessness really means to the people who are homeless.
I would really like to know why these surveys weren't more well-known. I am someone very interconnected with agencies in this town. I frequent here a lot, and I was completely unaware of the survey, so I was unable to put in input that I think would have also been helpful information.
Absolutely. So I will be transparent in saying I'm quite new to this role, although this work has been around way longer than I've been in this role. And I hear the concerns of wanting more conversations and more people included within this conversation. And I think it opens an opportunity for another survey to be done as well, in which we can pitch more of a wider net and include those concerns, that feedback, and then make sure that outreach is being done properly. I do know that a lot of work, hard work went into this, but there is always room for improvement, as always. Going into the next question, what parts of the Douglas County Tenant Experience Survey report do you believe are critical to understanding current barriers to housing security? Abby?
In one word, trauma. The vast majority of us in poverty are partially in poverty because of some form of trauma, whether it's sexual assault, whether it was childhood abuse, whether it was being in the foster care system. It all boils down to trauma. Trauma is part of why people become addicts, become alcoholics. If we can't work around this trauma, then how are we going to help people get housed? Because trauma is also what instills fear, and fear prevents us from doing what we need to do.
Absolutely. Would anyone else like to add to that?
So you said from the survey, because I didn't know about the survey until today either. I'm not sure how that got by me, but so if it's answering from the survey, I don't know what the survey.
Potential points from the survey that highlight some of the barriers or potential barriers that you see?
Again, I think there is a stigma with the term homeless. And the immediate one is they're lazy. They just need to get a job. They just need to do this. They just need to do that. That's way easier said than done. In any community, I don't care what the community is, especially when they're often bringing homeless people from other communities and dropping them off in Lawrence. There was a woman that came in regularly at the TRC from St. Joe, and she was terrified. And she was suffering from mental and emotional illness. She should be institutionalized, but she was in and out of that place so much, and people just made fun of her. And she was terrified. She was so scared. It was hard to watch. She was all of 5 foot, 80 pounds dripping wet, just a tiny little thing. And people aren't aware of what's really happening out there, and and even more why it's happening, and why it's hard for them to get back in and start a new life. It's not easy. It's not easy. And I think people aren't aware of what's happening.
So I'll add on to that. I was one of the members of the SBE Housing Work Group that helped create the survey. I think that I can speak to some of the most critical data, at least from my perspective. From my perspective, the identified lack of safe, affordable housing in our community is something that we all need to understand. And I know that there are efforts towards increasing that, but I don't think that they are meeting the current need, the increasing need that we have. I think we need to understand the discrimination that renters are facing, be it ethnic, their gender, sexuality, their disability, their parental status, etc.
and the power imbalance that exists between renters and landlords, and the lack of supports to address housing and rental issues and violations of code. That came up in some of our survey results that you guys saw earlier. I think it's really important to understand that people more often than not, experience more than one barrier. There's a lot of intersectionality to these issues that needs to be taken into account to truly understand the struggles that community members are facing when it comes to housing insecurity. Because the more barriers that someone is facing, the more likely that they are to have housing insecurity and other struggles.
I have something to add on to his. It comes back to trauma. Too much of society, and I'm sorry for the way this is going to come out, but are willfully ignorant to trauma. PTSD can make it horrifically impossible to get a job or keep a job. That is some of why the homeless are unemployed, because they're going through things that Burton Ash is dropping the ball on, and they're slipping through the cracks. It's so much more than, oh, they're lazy, or oh, they're a drunk, or oh, they're a junkie, or, it's so much more than that. And we can't get better as a city when there's so much willful ignorance.
Absolutely. And Christina, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I wrote a lot of the points that were kind of reflected in the meat of the survey. I wrote like safety. So I have a public health background, and I feel like when we talk to people, they don't realize how many folks live with mold in their apartments. I think we could all agree at a baseline that you wouldn't want to live with mold. Neither should other folks. And I found the statistic that of the maintenance requests where 63% said they would submit a maintenance request and they wouldn't come or it wasn't resolved. And that's something I would love to learn more about, what type of maintenance requests is, because I really think that's a public health issue at its core. Income, renters' rights, and education. Pets is another big one. I feel like that doesn't get a light shine on it quite often. And then the support system. So when you're short on rent, who can you turn to? What organizations? In my case, I'm Native American with a federally recognized tribe. The Navajo Nation during COVID times had renter assistance, but even that was, there was more of those programs, I feel like, during COVID times, and without strings attached. Sometimes a lot of these programs ask so much of you. No support, so a lot of folks do have to turn to payday loans, risking their credit scores and cycle, and it just repeats the cycle of needing a good credit score for housing. And then I found the part for reason of denial of housing applications by property managers or landlords on page 42, if you're reading the report, where 57% of respondents reported not been given a reason when they were applied for housing. I found that shocking, and I think you think these are common courtesies, but sometimes it takes policy to hold folks accountable.
Thank you so much for your responses. Moving on, so can you speak to the importance of including community members and those with lived experiences and understanding these issues and making progress towards solutions?
Sure. So I personally think that without representation from community members who are directly experiencing these housing issues, we cannot legitimately address housing concerns. Our work must be informed by the people who are impacted by local housing legislation, housing insecurity, and really all community members, inclusive of their intersectionality, need to be provided a platform to help inform decision-making. They're the ones who are living with the impact of these decisions, and they're the experts in their own needs. We cannot responsibly move forward with progress on these issues until we ensure that everyone is being heard in an equitable way. And the barriers that are being identified are addressed in a way that's meaningful and supportive to those who are struggling with those issues.
Thank you so much, Margot. Abby?
If people don't feel safe advocating for themselves, how are we going to know what to fix? Closed mouths don't get fed. And if we can't all come together as one and communicate these things, then we're stagnant.
I'll add on to that and say that
It's true that closed mouths don't get fed, but we must create a space where it's safe to be vocal about our needs.
I think lived experience is gold. It's worth more than a master's or a PhD degree. You don't need fancy degrees, you know, to share that lived experiences that folks are going through today. I will never understand fully. So we need these folks at the table and creating space for folks with lived experiences at the table and supporting them to be advocates in their community. A lot of these times when you are seen as a leader, kind of have a target on your back. So having that community support is very important. And I just share examples sometimes of, in my scope of work at the state legislature, I love when we have moms who run for office and who are legislators, because there was one time a bill about lowering the driver's license age, and a mom who has 7 kids, you'd think she would be for this legislation, right? Another kid that she doesn't have to drive to sports practice. And she gave a really amazing reason why this was a bad idea. And as me with no kids, I had no lived experiences to tap into. So it just really goes to show how folks who are currently living that struggle or previously lived that struggle will bring that perspective that you had probably the privilege of not experiencing.
Again, I have to go back to awareness and breaking that stigma, and like Abby said, the ignorance is bliss, and it's easy for people to put blinders up and pretend this is not happening. And one of the sad things about that is Lawrence is a very wealthy town. There's a lot of money here in business, and there's very wealthy people here that make boatloads of money who work at KU, not all of them, but there's a lot of money here. And these kinds of people who could help need to be convinced to help. They need to realize that they're not helping people who are horrible or lazy or junkies. Some of them, yes, do become junkies. They do become drug addicts because that dulls the pain. That's since the beginning of time. Like people who went to Vietnam did that. People who went to Korea. People, you want to escape. And then you become a drug addict or an alcoholic. And people think that they're just this way because they don't want to work. They don't want to try, and it's all about that ignorance. And we need to make them aware. There's got to be a way to make them aware so there's not just 1,000 surveys. I'm still shocked at that one.
So as we're looking at the report as well, do any of the policy recommendations proposed in the report seem especially relevant or timely for our community?
Timely, absolutely not.
Do you want to expand on that?
I think a lot of these issues should have already been addressed long ago. I think it's embarrassing that these things are just now really getting addressed this deeply. Why weren't we coming together before? Why weren't we advocating for the other people of our community? We're stronger together than we are by ourselves. So why haven't we done this already? Why haven't we been over these things? Why haven't we made landlords do trauma-informed classes? Why does LDCHA allow landlords to get away with certain things, like charred outlets, for example? Those charred outlets are a fire hazard. I personally had a child temporarily die in a fire, and to live in a home that had a charred outlet was terrifying. It is extremely traumatic to see your child die and to know that she could die again. And LDCHA allowed that to pass twice, not just once, twice. How is that okay? How are we not rising together to fight that kind of treatment, to fight that kind of neglect? Because again, that adds to trauma. That adds to people not feeling safe. And when we don't feel safe, we're not as good at advocating for ourselves. We're not as good at knowing what we need because we're not in our rational mind.
Thank you, Abby, for sharing that vulnerable experience. Would anyone else like to add to the relevancy of policy?
Yeah, I can. So I see the policy recommendations if you have the report out, page 30. There is a couple sets of policy recommendations, and I feel like all are important. But I would like to see the community and the state legislator. Oftentimes, we'll get like a one-pager from organizations or nonprofits of their policy priorities. And I highly recommend ranking at the top 5 from 1 maybe being the low-hanging fruit, easy to medium, to 3 being most difficult, maybe 4 or 5 for shooting the stars, because we need something to continue to look forward to. I think all of it is timely and relevant, and having these conversations at the county and local level would be is really much needed and continue to be needed.
To wrap up my portion of the questions before I open it to the floor, was there anything missing from the report that could be considered from a policy standpoint?
Yes. How accessible are rental rights handbooks? Not everybody has a phone, not everyone has a computer, and not everyone has money or internet. I currently don't have internet, and it's been an impedance. I think there needs to be more printed copies at the places that did these surveys so that people know, because it's much easier to get your rights violated if you're completely clueless as to what they are.
I think one thing that I found to be touched on but not quite developed is the idea of some kind of review board. I think, in my perspective, ideally it would include community members, it would include landlords, it would include policymakers. I think everyone needs to be at that table and be a part of that process to make it as equitable as possible. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for us to come together and work on these issues. We just have to take advantage of that opportunity.
I just saw pieces of the policy. So I'm going to answer from Christina's presentation. To hear about people's rent being shot up $200 angers me. That's just renter abuse. And the city needs to step up, and there needs to be accountability. There needs to be some guidelines there and some lines drawn in the sand where you can't just up someone's rent like that. That's not okay. And I think there needs to be some education and some accountability there. And again, I think the city could come up with ways to give people incentives to step forward and help with some of these organizations to help the homeless. I know there's ways to do it, and I hope someday that'll happen. Get more volunteerism going on and give people incentive to volunteer. If anything, I mean, I've talked about going out and getting businesses that donate gift cards and things like that for people who do volunteer. For people who are homeless and want to come volunteer, clean up areas, let's find a way to get them gift cards. I'm actually quite good at that. I used to do that a lot and raise funds and gift cards and stuff for that kind of stuff. So I would love to do that. But again, I go back to a population of over 120,000 and 1,000 surveys. That's not okay. We need to bring about some more awareness that will handle and cover, I think, a lot of these policies and help with them.
I want to give Representative Haswood a second to respond to this.
You're good. I think it's hard to add more questions to a survey coming from a research background. So I would really like to learn more of a lay of the land landscape of who's on the opposite end of stopping these policies. I want to see business names. I want to see LLCs. And I want to see, at the state legislature, we can see who are like registered lobbyists and lists of testimony. I'm not too sure if it's as accessible as the county or local level. I don't think it is, because the city commission packet is like 100 pages long. So I'd like to see a lay of the land of what has been attempt and what was attempt in like 2000, and what continues to be brought up to the city commission, just because I feel like that policy at the local level is really muddy. And staffing wise, I know with inspections, you always need to, there's always not enough room in the budget to have people go and inspect housing and housing codes. So I'd like to see what do you call it, like a full-time FTOs or whatever, and just kind of see like what would the dream picture be for Lawrence? How many inspectors, health inspectors, should we need to hire? What would that budget look like, and moving forward, and kind of what has been done historically? What kind of federal funding are we, missing out on because we don't have enough grant writers for the local levels? Just kind of painting a little bit more fuller picture that way.
Thank you all so much. We are going to move into audience questions. I have the first one, and then after that, I'll run around with a microphone if anyone else has any. So, what barriers were not identified in the survey?
Well, I like the point that someone in the back brought up about us not having representation for people who were formerly involved in foster care. I think that's an excellent point, because we have identified that is a barrier for folks. If you are in and out of the foster care system, if you have no family supports, if you have no one guiding you on how to build your credit, on how to create a savings, on how to apply for a job, you are going to struggle more. And guaranteed, youth in the foster system have trauma, come with trauma. In a prior position, I worked for the Shelter Inc. with foster children and juvenile offenders, and I can tell you that not one of the kids that I worked with did not have trauma.
Would any other panelists like to add to this question?
Maybe other barriers could have been like mental health diagnoses, if folks wanted to disclose that. Just showing, I think we heard from some of the experts here today that PTSD, traumatic experiences, and if that person has support to seek those services, and making sure that they have a holistic care that they're receiving from our community needs, and kind of maybe identifying, are they going to Burt Dash? Are they going to Heartland? Are they doing telehealth? Maybe that would be more help to paint a better picture of folks, are just trying to survive. And I think also barriers of food insecurity. There was, I think, a quote in the report that said that I had to feed my family before I could pay rent. There's so many decisions when it comes to this point of the month where you're like, it's getting cold, I gotta pay the heat, I gotta get gas so I can take my kid to school. There's so many other things I feel like folks who don't understand what it's like to be in this situation, that takes priority over paying rent. And I'd like to see, just personally, my landlords, they give us a apartment renewal in January, and I'm like, I don't know where my life is gonna be in July and August, and they kind of incentivize that you get $50 off your first month of rent, this and this, and when it comes to waiting the last second, and it seems like I don't get a full-time job, I'm like, okay, then I have to stay. So I always was curious if everyone else kind of had a similar story of landlords maybe sneaking in these sneaky tactics to keep you at their location longer.
I think, I mentioned this earlier, the lack of childcare for people who are struggling is huge. And I have a couple friends I've seen talking on Facebook who have a couple kids who are saying, can anybody help watch my kids? Because I'm going to have to quit my job because their dad won't watch them, in-laws won't watch them. And I mean, what do they do? very rare can you take your kids to work, and it's more and more work-at-home jobs are getting filled up. What do you do in those situations? And I think that is a massive barrier. And these are people who are housed, they're not homeless. Imagine not being housed and trying to find childcare so you can go work, or you can go to school, or whatever. I think that would have a huge impact on this whole topic if childcare were addressed.
And I'll even add on to that I've experienced working with more than one person who had a special needs child and could not utilize even the available supportive childcare because they required a one-to-one aid that had to be, they had to go through a waiver process and they had to get insurance on board. And there are so many steps that people who don't struggle with these issues don't see. It's all invisible, but it's still part of the process, and it's still hugely impactful because that person could not work a job until she had someone who could care for her special needs child.
Abby?
I actually want to touch on two barriers, but first and foremost, as someone with a partner on heart medication, it is really stressful to not have any agencies that will help with that, and then trying to decide, okay, which bill do I pay or do I let my partner die? Also, I think the city, if they reduce the cost of the peddler's license, last I knew that was $250, that maybe we'd be able to get more people off the streets, because, I mean, there's plenty of ADHD people with all kinds of skills, and if we can make that more affordable, then they will use their skills to get out of homelessness. I would have been out of there faster if I could have afforded $250.
Right. We have two more questions from the audience that I want to touch on. One is a great question that I'm going to open to the panel, but I also want to recognize that this is a large conversation, and so potentially if we don't have an answer tonight, then that's something that we can explore into. But we had a question from an international student talking about renters' rights in regards to students. The two questions, is how do we make sure that there are accessible rights, renters' rights to students, and that there is no backlash to actually asking for your rights?
I think that's a tricky question.
That is a tricky question, but a great question nonetheless. Would any panelist?
I think that I can speak to at least the second half of that question and say that that's not an easy thing to guarantee right now, because even people who are not struggling with the added, I won't call it a barrier, but issue of being an international student is that even people who are citizens cannot guarantee that there will be no backlash from their property manager or their landlord from trying to address an issue.
Absolutely. Representative Haswin?
I think supporting organizations like Lawrence Tenants and having that, someone who might not be directly related to government might ease burdens and concerns for an international student who might be here on a student visa and is probably walking on eggshells every day to be in good standing with that visa. Just seeing third hand from my partner, the departments oftentimes kind of create this environment and everyone kind of takes care of each other in that way. And having a buddy, be a roommate or be there for that international student, because there's also language barriers where probably the situation in their home country is not going to be the same in our country. And I think just making and supporting organizations outside of our local government to be that, I would say, more friendlier face, because I know if I was an international student, I wouldn't want to go to the government entity for renters' rights. I'd feel more comfortable with among my peers or an organization on campus or an organization that provides free meals that says no landlords.
tenants. I think that those resources, like the Lawrence tenants in the back, they're tabling, so make sure that you go and say hello, ask for resources, or ask a way to get involved.
I have something on that,
Yes,
actually.
absolutely.
Hopefully, it's going to answer that particular question. So often on Facebook, I see people asking about, well, my landlord's doing this, my apartments are doing that. Can they get away with that? What can I do? What's the law on that? Nobody knows. And a lot of times they'll send them to the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority, and they don't have as many answers as you think they do. I'm a fan of the Housing Authority because they've done amazing things for me. I know they're not popular with everybody and they make their mistakes, but they're a great entity. But nobody knows the answers to these things. And I think that would be a life-changing resource in this town if there was a number where you could call, where someone was trained in these laws so they can help you and help you protect yourself, protect your family. And even landlords needing to protect themselves from extremely destructive tenants. I mean, there's another flip side to that. Some landlords are on edge and a little afraid to rent to certain people. I get it. But there's a way to do it fairly. You can't punish all tenants because of what some other tenants have done. That's not okay. And again, education, awareness would be crucial in this area.
It's a great question that we might not have all the answers to, but is a way that we're opening the conversation and seeing ways in which the survey could benefit for next time. Part 2 of the survey. Lastly, I will ask, what are the resources that were accessible or beneficial to you in times in which you needed to lean on those resources? Were there any that you would like to shout out or highlight for the community?
I'm a veteran, and so I did have some assistance that other people don't have, and I'm so grateful to be a veteran. But again, the Douglas County Housing Authority stepped up and they helped, and they got me into a place pretty quickly after being homeless, and they got me into a place after I was evicted and lost a huge amount of my property and stuff from my childhood, my son's childhood, that I'll never see again, and that happens a lot to people here, and you don't ever get that stuff back. But the Housing Authority has been remarkably compassionate about stuff like that, but I know they are stretched tight. Like, they are really stretched tight for resources, and they could probably use help with volunteers as well. But that was a resource that helped change my life, and Catholic Charities was pretty huge.
Just Food was a big savior for me. And you literally just got to walk in and sign a little form. It's like your first name, last name, address, and it's really minimal. And I like the way that they set it up. I went there when we were out of session. So, I could just walk in and I wouldn't feel that stigma. I'm already embarrassed, right, that I can't buy groceries. And so I think just walking in there, and it just felt, like I wasn't really being judged. It was like, cool, like, you want some bread too? We got some bread type of thing. So that was awesome. I would say my parents. So I'm very privileged to have a good relationship with my parents. I have 2 parents, and they have helped me when rent was really short. And running for politics and all that, it was really hard to keep a full-time job. So just climbing that ambitious ladder can be really difficult at times. And my partner's parents, and I have a partner where we split rent and utilities half and half, so that's been really great. And the City of Lawrence's back to school program, where they you took off like $20 off your parking tickets. I think those are super cool, super fun way to relieve burden on folks. The last thing that I'm worrying about is paying my parking tickets. I'll get to it, I promise. But these programs are like, I've just felt so accomplished that this burden was there, because I'm already dealing with student loan payments. I'm already dealing with, making rent and budgeting and credit card debts and all this and that. And these are just such real realities for folks.
I have four that I would like to give major credit to. Catholic Charities, Just Food, especially Tom and Kathy there. They have been an absolute comfort in some of my worst times. They always are attentive and they pick up on it even when I try and hide it, because they just pay so much attention to people in the community. And sometimes that changes your day. It takes you from wanting to give up to being like, you know what, there are people that care. Social Service League, I can't give them enough credit. There was a point in time where my kids and I weren't in the safest position, and I was able to teach my kids that that is a safe place, and they know that if anything's to happen, that they are safe there, even if they have to separate from me. And to know that is, there's no words. There's just no words. In Sunrise Project, I'd scream it on mountaintops for them. We ended up in some bad positions a few times where we would have been lost without Sunrise Project, like absolutely lost. And one of the things that I love the most about going there is you see the genuine joy in them. Like, they love what they do, genuinely love it. And sometimes when you've been through trauma, it's hard to believe that that's real. But as someone with trauma, I don't second guess it with them. And that's not a normal thing for me, but it's refreshing. And they do amazing work. And I can't say it enough.
Okay, well, let's give a big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you all so much for sharing your experience. And I will turn it over to Belinda.
Hello, I'm Belinda Flores, she, her pronouns. I work at the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, managing the Sexual Violence Prevention Program. So this survey, as well as work done by the Sexual Violence Prevention Group, is supported through funding from the CDC's Rape Prevention and Education Program. And it may seem like there's not always a streamline of connections, but sexual violence and housing work they have a lot in common with shared risk and protective factors, such as poverty or even different social norms, like we heard a lot of the stigma of housing today. And so this survey is also going to be not only the survey results, but what we heard today will be very useful in informing future strategies of the work group, as the funding that's going to this care center is renewed for another 5 years, so they'll be getting funding through 2029. So this work and gaps that we see that we're able to fill in will help inform our strategies. I also want to share that the work already done in Douglas County with housing and sexual violence prevention has been shared at a national level through different conferences to other states, and people are really interested in the work that Douglas County is doing, and so I hope to continue to impress people with the work being done. I don't know if Gabby has any additional closing remarks.
I don't. Thank you so much, everyone. I think the survey results and the voices of our panelists today, there's certainly a lot of heavy information and heavy data and heavy experiences that were shared, but I think there's also a lot of hope, a lot of conversation about unity, about moving forward together. We already know that that's possible through source of income and the work that was done around that protection, and there's so much more momentum to come. So again, would encourage you all to stop and check in with Lauren's tenants, get connected to fellow tenants, and thank you so much for being here. That's all I have to say, I guess. Thank you.